Welcome to Esalen Live, where we chat with change agents and swim deep waters in an ongoing exploration of human potential. I'm Christine Chen, your host. We are happy to share that Esalen is open again for on campus workshops. One of the first faculty to return is Ira Israel. He's a psychotherapist and author, and his workshop on resilience during challenging times starts next week. His book, How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult, guides our conversation on Esalen Live today. Now that we're trying to figure out how to navigate our hopeful emergence from the pandemic. Hi, Ira. How are you?
Christine, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to see you. Good to see you again. How are we doing here? How are we going to navigate our way out of this pandemic and quote unquote be normal again?
We have to think of intangible things such as our mind, attachment dynamics, like muscles. And during this pandemic, they've atrophied. So we need to strengthen them. And, that's what Esalen is all about. Learning how to reattune to other human beings, break bread. I know for the past year, a lot of people have been like eating alone and just the ability to interact with other people and attune to them and connect with them and validate their emotional experiences through the mask. It's really 93% of all communications are nonverbal. So I just went out and bought like every type of clear mask ever made, so that people, when I'm teaching, God, I can run and get them. I have every model. You have to be able to see, the eyes may be the windows to the soul, according to Shakespeare, but without the full expression of the face, we really have to, we're going to have to learn how to connect in some other way to show exuberance or love and compassion and things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to relearn our skill set that went dormant for a year. So here's something from your book that I pulled. Of course, the book is How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult. I love that title. This is one of the things that you say in it. The number one thing that correlates with happiness is how we connect with and attach to other people. Human beings are interdependent creatures. We do not grow or evolve in bubbles. And yet, Ira, we have been living in individual bubbles. And I know you wrote this book pre COVID, obviously, but what about that? How do we emerge from bubbles? How do we go to this place of happiness that means we get out of the bubble?
For me, the only panacea is authenticity, and it means becoming vulnerable again and having beginner's mind. And, yeah, we're going to get hurt. But we developed these defense mechanisms, and those defense mechanisms essentially became our personalities. And, I always compare because I lived in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles for my adult life. And it's very interesting if you ride the subway or the metro or the tube, you're 2 inches from other people like all day long. And in Los Angeles, everyone's in their car. It's a 2-ton metal or plastic container, and you can be a jerk because you're protected in some ways. Like you can give someone the finger, or you can. I feel like being apart from people, and that includes text messaging, and that includes zooming. It has the ability to exacerbate our lesser impulses and motivations. So for me, the dinners at Esalen, even though whatever the regulations are, 6 at a table outside, it doesn't matter. We really just have to learn how to break bread with people and to be with other people and just sit there and mirror and match their emotional experience. So we're going to have to, again, it's like a muscle that's atrophied, and we're going to have to rebuild it and strengthen it.
Yeah, this is a picture of you teaching yoga pre-COVID, and this is not the spatial parameters that we're going to offer when you come back to campus and teach your workshop. But this is really kind of the idea of what you're talking about are these connections that we are missing. I do want to ask you also, Ira, during COVID, during the pandemic, and maybe for the next year because it'll take some time to get out of this, we've relied on, let's say, we'll just call them things.
Mhm.
We've turned to things like coping mechanisms, right? And one of the things that you say in your book is that we should discern what activities we use to blow off steam and stop them from being afflictions or addictions. And this is the path for us to come to a place that's more compassionate and more alive now that we're trying to emerge from this time period. Tell us how to do that. I mean, I know we can't solve that in a minute, but some idea
Freud,
of such.
Freud wrote Civilization and its discontents, and it's a very interesting title because babies want to play when they're playful and eat when they're hungry and sleep when they're tired and poop when they have to poop. And as human beings in Western civilization, we are really constrained. The emotional bandwidth that we're allowed to express, particularly uh, you know, uh, men, I find when they come into the office, they'll have a lot of anger on top, and I have to excavate that and get to the sadness. And then women have a lot of sadness on top, and I have to excavate that and get to the anger. Our society allows like a very narrow bandwidth of emotions. So we need to have remissions. That's the chapter in my book. Whether it's going to a football game or taking a run or going to a yoga class, something that allows us to burn off that bad juju and just like release, meditation or any of these things. Unfortunately, a lot of us enjoy imbibing fermented grapefruit.
Right. And then we should just say there's not a judgment, but this is where it crosses over the bridge of addiction and just
Exactly.
attachment to this, right? So just where could we live in that and try to not have
I'll
that
go
happen from your
right to
perspective?
Aristotle for this one. Everything in moderation, like so for me, for me honestly, there's a time and a place for everything, including the what Burning Man was 10, 15 years ago. There's a time and a place for us to express a very wide range of emotions. And unfortunately, if I do that on my street corner, I'll end up in a psych ward. But we need to find the tools that keep us at the high end of our happiness range, and all of those really exist in moderation.
Mm. And this is one thing you also say. Also, by the way, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, please float some questions into the comments and we'll try and feed those into Ira and he can answer your questions. This is another thing you say in your book. And our way to happiness and compassion is to learn how to attune to other people so that we can securely connect with them. Yet, I will say that our means of connection has just been odd, right? Because during this time we are on Zoom. We've done more video calls than we ever thought we would be doing in a lot of ways. How do we attune when this is what we're working with right now? It's going to be probably a year before we go back out into quote unquote normal.
I'll tell a funny story. When I first started doing my internship as a psychotherapist 15 years ago, I had a supervisor joke and say, darn, I could turn anyone into a psychotherapist off the street in 5 minutes. Like, you don't have to go get all your 4 degrees. And then he just leaned in and he said, that sounds very challenging. That sounds very difficult. And it's a funny joke. And in the book, and the line that people like is mirror neurons do not fire via text message. So what I'm interested in is that when you do that reflective listening, you are validating someone else's emotional experience. If you can mirror their facial affect, their furrowed brow, their smile, their lack of smile, what goes on in their head is that, oh, I'm not crazy. Like, somebody
Mhm.
understands mean, that's what empathy is, and we need that. So that's what I'll be teaching in the workshop coming up this weekend, how to attune to other people, because I do think that, we might have, I'm thinking in my head right now, like we're on Zoom all the time. And then we have these other windows like, oh, I'm checking Facebook, I'm checking Instagram, I'm checking what's on the news, I'm checking here, right? And so we've done this multitasking thing for the last year and a half, if any of us would admit it. And now we have to get back and really be committed, to showing up in this new empathetic, compassionate, loving way.
Another thing that you say in your book is talking about not just attuning to others. And by the way, just to add there, I think that's one of the reasons that they say we get so exhausted on these Zoom calls is that we have to really pay attention a lot more to facial reaction because the whole body isn't there and there's no energy exchange the way that it used to be. One of the things you also say in your book is being congruent, having our outer lives match our inner lives that will keep us at the higher ends of our happiness spectrums. Now, you just mentioned happiness spectrums. What does it mean to have inner and outer lives match,
So,
or from your perspective?
two quotes from the book. The first is from Winnicott, who says, "We develop a false self in order to survive our childhood and get our emotional and psychological needs the best we can get them met as children. We learn all these tools. Maybe you were the jock or the sarcastic person, or the musician, or the chess player, or I'm thinking of Queen's Gambit. But you develop the
Great
personality.
show. Great show.
Whatever you developed was great for when you were 7 or 11. And now those tools might be hindering you from getting the love that you really crave. So I take the second quote, which is from Andre Gide. It is better to be loved for who you are than to be hated. It is better to be hated for who you are than to be loved for who you are not. So so there's this irony because we develop a false self in some ways, and we're like, oh, I'm rich, I went to a good school. You do this whole thing about your pedigree and where you vacation and whatnot, but it's a trap because it's really fomenting resentment, because what you crave as a sentient being is to be loved unconditionally without all the accoutrements and all the things around you. You just want to be there with the person and know that they love you and are there and they have your back and you are securely attached.
I love the way that you describe that. The other thing that you also want to share with us is that part of navigating these waters right now and learning compassion and to be listening to inner outer selves is to learn how to be okay with the fact that our futures are uncertain. And that's everybody right now, right? That when they occur, they will certainly contain both joys and sorrow. Direct quote from your book. But this is probably the thing that faces us the most right now is to really be okay when the future is uncertain. Can you give
Right.
us a little bit of insight into how we meet ourselves compassionately in that?
Well, it's, again, the tool of authenticity, but specifically in this instance, the second noble truth of Buddhism is that the root of all suffering is desire, which manifests as clinging and aversion. So, and Freud talked about this in the pleasure principle also. So your mind was built in this way to attach and cling onto anything that's joyful, and then to try to avert and push away anything that's not. And that's the problem. The problem is the clinging and aversion. So what I'm teaching, again, beginner's mind, show up and be like, wow, that's really pleasurable. And it's going to end. And when something terrible happens, you immediately, if you were, if you studied this stuff, you'll say, "This too shall pass. I will get over this. It's okay. Non-fatal. Somebody just did. They called me a name. I'm not gonna. It's not life-threatening." But the true awakening is when you reach that, like the most joyous ecstasy, and you can also say, "This too shall pass."
Oh, And now I know that you're kind of going over this really lightly because we're in this format, but we'll dive a little deeper if you attend Ira's workshop. So I want to say that coming up, his workshop starts on Sunday. It is cultivating resilience during challenging times. It's on campus. We are open at Esalen, and he will also be with us for the Digital Summit series, and we'll talk about opening new doors after the last year. The Digital Summit's called The Way Forward. But first, let's talk about some highlights from your workshop. So I wrote some of these things down just so we could see at home. But Monday, you kick it right off like how our minds were built. That's a pretty deep topic.
Well, for me,
How do we, is this how we get in?
there's three routes into the subconscious. One is dreams, which Carl Jung talks about. The second is magic. And so I'm a huge fan of Darren Brown. I actually wrote an article calling him the greatest psychologist in the world. If you don't know the magician, the mentalist, Darren Brown's work, you ought to. And then the third way is jokes. Freud wrote jokes and the subconscious, and then Lacan's fifth seminar is all on jokes. So it's interesting to me the way why jokes work. Like you can't tell your cat or dog a joke, right? It's a human phenomenon, but it operates because of the way the mind is structured. If you don't mind, I'll just go into it. If I say he's as dumb as a, your mind does this thing where it has like 50 things that come up. And if I say any of those 50 things, rock, chair, fish, not funny. And then there's this infinite amount of things like Venus that are absurd, that don't relate. So for me, laughter is this time when your mind says, oh, I should have thought of that, but you didn't. And so that's one, I'll use a lot of jokes and movies and clips and things to show us how we all have expectations. And that's why magic is so interesting too, because everything is a setup. And then the rabbit out of the hat is when something is unexpected. So again, jokes, magic, dreams are a way to just see how your mind is structured and how your subconscious operates and builds all these expectations, which essentially are prejudices or are showing up now as just like disappointments. So the first day is one of my favorites because I get to do all this magic and all these mentalisms and all these little tricks. And just because the mind's such a fascinating thing, human consciousness is so arrogant, is I think, and problematic. So,
And Ira, there's a question from Lizette. Isn't metaphor also a good way into this unconscious? I think she means subconscious.
yes, metaphor, metonymy, because if you study anything past deconstruction, everything is basically tautological. And then what Lacan calls point capitan, buttonholes. Like there are these. It's very interesting because for me, what I've studied is that Aramaic, Hebrew, and Sanskrit are primordial languages, right? So they came out of the ocean. They were these sounds, which is why when you ohm, that it resonates through your body. But then, for the past 1,000 or so years, like we just live in our heads. There's that beautiful TED talk by Ken Robinson who says, in America, we primarily think of our bodies as transportation mechanisms for our heads. So yes, metaphor and metonymy are delicious to dive into because it kind of shows that everything is self-referential, if that makes sense. But thank you for that
Yep.
question.
Sure. You have a question from Fred also. What do you think of surrender of the will as a tool of resilience?
There's a quote by Eckhart Tolle, and it's similar to I think that's what's in the 12-step program. You change what you can, and when reality shows up in a way where you don't have agency, and you really have to watch your own mind because the desire to have agency could actually result in self-harm. So surrendering and being vulnerable is super important. That's a great question, Fred.
Mm. So again, the highlights for Ira's workshop starting on Sunday leads all the way to Thursday was surfing the paradoxes of life, which is the kind of thing that we're hoping to do right now with everything unpredictable and just trying to navigate uncertain times. But Ira, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for answering people's questions and being here. And I think we're also going to see you in the summit coming up as well, March 13th and 14th, digital summit that's free for all. You're going to be talking about how to open new doors, given the fact that we were behind closed doors for the entire last year.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, good to see you, Ira. Thanks everyone for joining us here on Esalen Live. Stay connected, esalen.org. We are open. Book Ira's workshop. There's plenty of other workshops coming up as well. Stay connected on Esalen, Facebook, and Instagram. Bye, Ira. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.